So this is our third week of our Reclaiming Your Sexuality After Sexual Trauma series. I am Angel. I am going to be your host. Amanda's here helping us out. And we're just going to get started. So now I can share my screen. Awesome sauce. So, okay. So this is our third week. We're doing this. Our topic tonight is healthy sexual goal setting. So we did our roadmap and impacts of trauma over the last 2 weeks. So if you're joining us now or you're catching these videos later in the future and you're kind of out of order, those were the first two. So just quickly, like, who are we? What is this? I am a victims advocate with the Women's Center of Jacksonville. WCJ has 3 main departments. I work specifically for the rape recovery team. So in addition to counseling and community education, which are the other 2 departments, the rape recovery team, we're all the advocates. We run the rape crisis hotline. We do advocacy for survivors and for co-survivors. We do support groups. We do outreaches like this. And we have a 24-hour hotline, and the number is on the screen, but it's 904-721-7273. And that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Someone is there. We are, our organization and our team specifically uses an empowerment model. And what that means is that we're here to present you with options and resources and then empower you to make the choices that work the best for you. And so that's really what this is this is meant to be, this whole series is not meant to be like, here's your blueprint for exactly what healing will look like, foolproof plan, 10 steps, get your punch card, get your free froyo, and then you're healed. That's not what this is. This is meant to be a series that will provide some resources, provide some options, provide things for you to consider, things to potentially integrate into your healing program. Some of this will work for you, some of this will not resonate with you. So what does work, keep and use it. What doesn't work, just leave it, and that's fine. But this is just meant to be what I hope are helpful resources. Okay, so because I am totally fine with questions. I encourage questions. So for that, I do just like to start with some group agreements because of the topics. So just keeping some things in mind that using I statements when we ask questions. So that just is really about remembering that we're all in different places in our journey. And so what's true for one of us might not be true for every one of us. And so speaking from that place of that I statement, your mileage may vary. That also goes back to we're in different places in our journey, and what works for one person doesn't work for everyone. And so what is a great resource or a great point or a great opportunity for one person to learn and grow just won't resonate with everyone else, and that's okay. And vice versa. Staying open to learning, listening with compassion. So knowing that the questions we all have and the places that we're all at, we're all here and we're being sincere. And so we're staying in that space. And then remembering that these sessions are open to the public and they are recorded. So our support group is private. Our support group is confidential within that support group. But these lectures are recorded. We are going to right now the recordings are unlisted. That just means that people have to ask me to get the links, but we're going to be making the recordings listed, which means that anybody who goes onto the WCJ YouTube channel will be able to watch them in the future. So just remembering that when you're asking questions, just so you know. Everything provided in these lectures is information. So just remembering, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I am a certified sexuality educator. I am state certified victims advocate. I am bringing some expertise and experience to this, but this is not meant to take the place of a relationship with a licensed mental health or medical provider at all. If anything, this will help inform those relationships. So just kind of remembering that for what it is. All right, so our agenda tonight, we're going to just talk a little bit about understanding sexual goal setting. Like, what does that even mean? And then we're going to talk about motivations for healing, motivations for goal setting, like why are you even in this? What's in this for you? And we talk about motivation a lot, like throughout the whole thing. So some of that might seem a little bit familiar, but we're going to apply it to this concept. And then we're going to do SMART goals, which I know that people have maybe mixed feelings about. If you've ever worked in an office setting, you've encountered the concept of SMART goals before. But we're going to do my version of SMART goals specifically for sexual healing. We're going to talk about affirmations, which is just how to take those motivations and write them into something that's actionable for you. We'll have times for questions, and then we'll talk about what's going to come up next time. We've slotted an hour and 15 minutes for this. I don't expect it to take the whole time tonight, but it might, but I don't think we're going to go over. So, okay, so let's just dive right in. Let's talk about first stages of trauma recovery. So we're talking about goal setting. I think understanding where you're at. So this idea of stages of trauma recovery comes from a book about trauma by an author named Judith Herman. And so I put the citation there, and I tried to make sure that there's citations everywhere this information is coming from or where I was learning when I got this information. But if you see something that doesn't have a citation and you want more information about it, in the later when you're going back over your notes or whatever, just reach out to me and I will send that information to you. But basically, what this concept is that there's immediately when you're in trauma recovery, there's what's happening in the present. So the very first thing is that your brain just wants to make sure you survive. So the first stage is just establishing safety. And so your brain is going to do whatever it takes, your brain and your body are going to do whatever they can do to get you through that moment. And then part of establishing safety is going to be the immediate aftermath of coping skills, self-care, self-regulation, addressing symptoms from that trauma. So that first stage of trauma recovery is the trauma is newer, the trauma is fresher, and it's just kind of wrapping your head around the trauma and kind of absorbing the impact of that trauma in that first wave. So then the next kind of, as people are moving through that and they've had some time and some distance from their trauma, then that sort of next stage of trauma recovery is the past. And so it's when we start remembering things, maybe remembering how things were before the trauma, or maybe we've got some distance and the trauma is still coming up in our memories. And there's kind of two phases to the remembering piece. It's remembering and then also mourning. So mourning things that were lost, mourning how things used to be. There is a lot of grief in trauma, and so part of this phase of the past is dealing with that. So then, sorry, hold on, I'm gonna just, there we go, because I'm gonna fix that screen. Okay, so, and then the next stage is the future. So that's really about reconnection, and that's investing in your future goals, that's creating enduring relationships, that's kind of the moving forward phase. Now, I tried to represent this as being cyclical, mostly for the fact that trauma is not this step one, step two, step three, you're done, but also they do kind of follow in this order a little bit for folks. So you might find yourself slipping in and out of different parts of these phases, or you might find overlap between these phases. But generally speaking, as people are moving through their healing, they sort of pass through these phases in some form. And so where we're at in, where you're at in your healing is going to impact the way you're goal setting. It's going to impact what sexual healing looks like to you. It's going to impact, all of these factors. So just that's something to keep in mind. And there's no right or wrong time. We talked about this before to address your sexual healing. There's no right or wrong time to start on that journey. But when I say depending on where you're at with this, if you're in that first immediate, the trauma is so fresh, phase, some of what's happening here just may not feel like it's gonna land. You just may not be in a space where that's coming up for you. And if you're far down the road and you've got a lot of distance from your trauma, some of the stuff we say might seem oh, I feel like I've got a good handle on that. So just kind of remembering that we're all in different places in our healing. So, okay. All right, so setting yourself up for goal setting success. These are 3 C's: conscious, considerate, compassionate. This is things to consider, things to take on while you're moving into like a goal setting phase. So you've identified that you're ready to start reclaiming your sexuality. You're identified that you want to understand this part of yourself better. So how can you take care of yourself while you're moving through this process? Because some of you might be finding that it can make you feel a little tender. It can make you feel just some kind of way, you know? And so I want to remind you of these things. So the first one is conscious. One is conscious is awareness. So learning about the impacts of trauma and how they apply to you. So that's why we kind of led with that last week. It's also about learning to stay in the moment. And so a lot of the skills around trauma recovery are really about mindfulness and presence, because what trauma can do is it can it can make things seem confusing in terms of what is real and what isn't, what is a threat and what isn't. It can impact the way our brain processes what is a relevant cue for stress and what is a relevant cue for safety. And so mindfulness and self-awareness and presence and staying in that moment and that like state of consciousness of like, I'm grounded and I'm here, and learning how to come back to the moment if you feel triggered or you feel pulled out of the moment by your trauma, that's a really good exercise in self-care. And that's going to be a running theme. I think probably any trauma recovery discussion you have is going to probably include some discussion of like full presence and awareness. But we will talk about this a lot for the whole lecture series, this idea of practicing self-awareness and practicing like full presence. So understanding what the mechanisms are that are at play in your brain and those impacts of trauma, and then also learning like to stay in the moment. Be considerate. Being considerate of coexisting situations and coexisting conditions. So if I am a trauma survivor, but I also have chronic depression or chronic anxiety, the way that my trauma recovery process looks is going to be informed by my needs as somebody with chronic anxiety. And so that might be a different set of needs and resources than somebody who does not have chronic anxiety. Coexisting situations. I might not be able to put the brakes on everything and address my trauma the way I want to, because maybe I'm a single parent with small children, or maybe I have a really high-powered job, or maybe my situation demands that my presence and my focus is somewhere else, and it can make it more challenging to deal with trauma in a way that you would deal with it if you did not have those extenuating circumstances. The other part of being considerate is considering the resources that you do have available to you and the ways you can access new resources. And we'll talk a lot about that as we move forward. And then finally, compassionate. So reducing frustration by setting realistic goals. That's where our SMART goals are going to come in. And then practicing self-care and self-compassion. So again, reminding ourselves that there isn't this linear step of, if I just complete these 10 steps off this list, I will be healed from my trauma. It'll be like it never happened. I'll be a brand new puppy and everything will be good as new. And then feeling frustrated when that's not how it works. Self-care, self-compassion, realistic goals, that plays off of everything else we've talked about. It understands that trauma it impacts all of us. It understands that healing isn't linear. It understands that all of our processes are unique. And so if you really want to set yourself up for success, reminding yourself that like this is not going to be this perfect, clean 10-step and you're done process, but this is going to be a part of your journey for a while, and some people their whole lives in some fashion. And so yeah, just practicing some self-compassion and self-care as you move through it. Okay, so the ABCs, I come back to this a lot. I think it's a really, for me, a useful way of conceptualizing. It probably looks familiar if you have, sat in on any of the other things we've done so far, then you've seen this like little triangle before, but basically ABCs are affect, behavior, cognition. So your feelings, your thoughts, and your actions. And so I encourage people, start by considering your thoughts. So when you think of your sexuality, in this case, we're specifically talking about our sexual goals. We're talking about you know, how do we feel about ourselves sexually, or how do we feel about our sexual relationships, or how is our desire, how are we accessing sexual desire, whatever that is. Thinking about your goals, like if you could wake up tomorrow and have it all your way, what would that look like? And so that's kind of where you start, is in your thoughts. And then the next step of that would be considering how thinking about those things makes you feel. And, you know, sort of getting a handle on those feelings. And then also, does that make you want to act? Or are there actions that bring up those feelings for you? And so kind of understanding that it's all related. So I've got it broken down a little bit more on the next slide. And these are text-heavy slides, partly because a lot of folks do access this stuff later. And so having the extra text can help people just like make sure they have all the information they need. So please don't feel like if you're taking notes, I'll send you the slides. Don't feel like you have to write everything down or like read every single thing that's here. This is just for folks who end up accessing the information later. Having this can be really helpful. Okay, so starting with our thoughts. And we're building into goal setting. So thinking about like what's working for you now, and what would you like to change? And thinking about those questions independently of each other. So taking some time to think about all of the things that are working now. If maybe you're in a relationship you really like, or maybe you have a favorite toy you really like to play with, or maybe you have a movie you put on that makes you feel some kind of way, or maybe you have a favorite outfit that makes you feel really sexy. So what are the things that are working for you in terms of reclaiming your sexuality? What's a positive? And then what are the things you would like to change? And then kind of the next layer, where would you like to be? So that question I asked before, if you could wake up tomorrow and have it all your way, what does that look like? And so what this is this is brainstorming your goals, whether that's a big picture or small steps. This is just like, if it's a funnel, this is where all of the stuff is coming in. There's no wrong answers, you're just funneling it out. And then the next kind of phase of this, and it's an ongoing activity. You can do it anytime as a writing prompt, or as a chatting with a trusted partner, someone in your support team, or you can do it talking to your therapist or whatever. So these are just ways to help you conceptualize starting the goal setting process. So you're visualizing things as they are now. How does that make you feel? So thinking about everything as it stands, how do I feel about that thought? When I visualize meeting, maybe pick a goal. Visualize, maybe I have a goal to meet a partner and that I really trust and fall in love. And so I picture myself in love, and I think about how that makes me feel. As you move through your process of achieving your goal, so long term, you're gonna check in with yourself a lot. So the feelings thing, we're checking in with our feelings a lot. We're learning to identify and honor our feelings. Like, your feelings are valid. You may not want to act on all your feelings, and you may not want to let your feelings make all your decisions for you, but the way you feel matters. And treating your feelings with honor and trust and respect is a really good internal trust building exercise, and that can help you work through those trust building skills in your intimate relationships outside of yourself. But remembering feelings are not facts. So if a feeling comes up and it feels overwhelming, or if it feels scary, or if it feels like fear, or whatever it is, asking yourself, is this true? So we talk a lot about feeling safe versus being safe. Sometimes our trauma can cause a reaction that makes us feel unsafe in a situation that reminds us of something that happened, traumatic that happened. So maybe, person in a car accident hears the sound of a honking horn, and that can feel very triggering, and they can feel unsafe. And so that feeling of unsafe, that's the trauma response that your brain is still rewiring, right? That's that impact of trauma we talked about last time. So then that person might say, like, okay, I'm feeling panicky, I'm feeling unsafe. Thank you, body and brain, for taking care of me. Is that true? Am I really unsafe right now? Nope, I'm standing next to my car, loading groceries in. No, nothing's going on around me that makes me unsafe. No, okay, I'm safe. And so taking a moment to actively check in and connect those, and that's an act of like mindfulness and presence. So we talk about like staying conscious, staying aware. Where am I now? What is happening now? Is the feeling I'm having true? Not is it valid, is it true? So Okay, and then behavior. So that's our goal setting in action. So we're going to talk about SMART goals and how they apply to healing, and that's going to be a bulk of how we share tonight. And planning our goals. The planning part is really just as important as the steps you take to make it happen. So intention setting is a really powerful part of really achieving any goal, but then especially when we're talking about something heavy like moving through trauma or moving into like the phase of moving forward after trauma, and we're moving into this space in our life that has a lot of promise but might also be sticky. And so intention setting is going to be a really powerful part of that. And goal setting, that's what you're doing. You're setting your intention and you're learning to like be specific about them and what that looks like. So things to remember: stay really flexible, because this is not linear. We talk about this all the time. You're going to get sick of hearing that from me. Healing is not linear. Healing is spiralic, right? So staying in the moment, one step at a time. So we can get really caught up on, I'll just be happy when XYZ happens. I'll feel so much better when ABC happens. I'll be totally great when I'm down the road this long. And if we're always looking forward to, I'll be happy later, I'll feel better later, I'll be healed later, it can feel like we're chasing something we never catch. So staying in the moment, celebrating even the smallest wins, really learning to find, to honor where we're at in the process right now. So yes, having future goals, big goals, awesome, but breaking them down into smaller steps is how we like keep ourselves moving through that process. And then staying compassionate to yourself. You'll hear that from me a whole bunch too. This is not a perfect process. So, okay, so motivations for sexual healing. We're going to touch on this now, and then we'll come back to this again later. So this is just some stuff to think about. And so if you're working through any of this at home, this is stuff to like, again, process when you're journaling, or just like help when you're meditating or channeling with a support member of your support team, whatever. So your sexual desire is really about your motivation to engage in sex and intimacy. So we're gonna, when we do our lectures on sex ed, one of our lectures is entirely devoted to the difference between sexual desire and sexual arousal. So desire is the I want to have sex, and arousal is my body responding to sexual cues, and we're going to talk about that. But the I want to have sex part, for a lot of folks recovering from sexual trauma, that's the part that can feel really, that's one of the things that can feel really fuzzy, is just getting past the I want this, or the way I want it and what I want feels new or different or unfamiliar, or I can't wrap my head around it. I don't recognize the desire I have, or I don't have desire like I used to, or whatever. There's shifts in that. And really what sexual desire is motivation. Do I have a motivation to engage in sex and intimacy? Well, you're here, you're doing this. So that is something drew you to this point, this discussion. So somewhere there's a seed being planted wherever you're at. Maybe you're certain, yes, I do want this, and maybe you're not sure, but you're like, oh, you know what? So maybe there's a tiny crack in a window somewhere of an opening. But that's how this starts. Context makes all the difference in the whole world. So trauma puts your sexual desire into a new context, because sexual trauma specifically, it puts sex into an interest. It puts sex into a scarier context. It puts sex into a disempowering context. And so now you're looking at sexuality, and you have that trauma. That trauma is coloring that experience. And so now you are going to have to create new contexts for desire, because your brain is still in survival mode. Your brain is still wanting to take care of you. And so you're now going to take part of goal setting is creating those new contexts. So the activity here is consider current and past situations where you have experienced sexual desire, and then how is now different than before. Are there ways it's better? Are there ways it's worse? Again, everybody responds really differently to these experiences, and so where you're at could be all over the map. So ways to break that down even more. In what situations do I feel sexual desire? So are there any situations that make me feel desire at all? Is it putting on a pair of sexy underwear? Is it watching a sexy movie? Is it playing with a toy? Is it flirting with a partner or with a new date? Is it thinking about or reading erotica? Is it, so are there any situations currently where I feel desire, and what are they? So what are my contexts? When I do feel that desire, what comes next? Do I do anything about that? Do I not do anything about that? Do I have feelings that are complicated around it? Do I welcome it? Is it feel unwelcome? So just what comes next? Again, no judgment. This isn't a phase of we're not looking to fix right now. We're just looking to like take an inventory of where we're at. And then if I realize I'm not experiencing a lot of desire, or maybe any, is that a problem for me? Maybe it's not. Maybe again, we'll talk more about desire and arousal not being the same exact thing, but maybe that's just not where you're at right now, and maybe that's not what you're feeling, and that's also not a problem for you. Or maybe that is a problem, and then if it is a problem, why is it a problem? Why not? So just again, you're taking an inventory and exploring where are you at right now, because you want to know, what are my motivations? Well, until I've kind of taken stock of the situation, it's hard to start setting goals around it. So we'll talk about positive and avoidance motivations. Again, we'll talk about them more. We've touched on them in other talks. But an approach motivation, that's a motivation to gain something. So that's, I want to be able to do something. I want to get this thing. I want to have more of this. An avoidance motivation, that's thinking of something you want to get rid of, or something you want to avoid. So we'll talk more about this, but this is basically about why is this goal important to you. Okay, SMART goals for trauma recovery. I really like this. This is helpful for me in conceptualizing this concept. I know some people also do dumb goals, which is really neat. So if you've never looked into that either, that's really cool. But we're gonna go through each one of these very quickly. And then there's also one slide at the end that pulls them all together. So if you are reviewing slides later, I just try to make that easier for you. Okay, so S is specific. And I have edited these. So if you've like done SMART goals at work, this is gonna be a little bit different than that. But basically what you're doing is, this is where you're clearly articulating what your goals are. So in the context of sexuality and intimacy, this is going back to considering what our motivations are. And so ways to start doing that are to create, I'm a list maker, so you're gonna hear me recommend list making a lot. And whether you're physically making a list, or whether you're brainstorming in a conversation with a friend, or whether these are just kind of how you organize your thoughts, creating lists. And so one of your lists would be, again, considering in the context of sex and in the context of intimacy, creating a list of thoughts and feelings and interactions that feel harmful or troublesome or painful or hurtful. So things that are not desirable. And then creating a list of thoughts and feelings and interactions that are enjoyable and pleasurable. So you've got like a pro-con list for feelings and thoughts and behaviors around sexuality. And so you're kind of taking an inventory of like, kind of, when this comes up, I really don't like the way this feels, but when this comes up, I really love this, and I wish I had more of this in my life, or I really miss this because I enjoyed it when I felt it. So that list creating can be a really good way to start narrowing in on specificity in your goals. Okay, measurable. So you're writing a goal. How are you going to measure success at this goal? And this is such an important thing to keep in mind with trauma recovery. What's your definition of success? And I don't have an answer to that for you. This is something you're going to come up with on your own. Maybe you'll come up with this talking to a partner or your therapist. But the definition of successful trauma recovery is in you. It's in your own sense of feeling like it has less of a hold on you, feeling more empowered, feeling more in control. So you're going to be the one who knows what success looks like at each of these things, but but giving yourself a barometer. So part of your goal creating and part of that process of goal creating is going to be looking at your goals and asking yourself, like, okay, what does success look like in this goal? If your goal is just, I want to be healed, that's a really, like, what does healed mean? What does success look like with healed? Like, maybe breaking that down into, I'd really like to be able to go to the movies and have a better handle on potential triggers that might come up for me and know how to work through them. And success would be going to the movies, you know, twice a month with friends of mine. And this is obviously in a post-COVID world. You know, going to the movies twice a month with friends of mine and feeling good about the interactions and handling and coping with triggers if they come up in a movie. Something like that. So that might be an example of a more specific way to set a goal. And then success is moving through that situation in a way that is building on these coping skills. And we're going to talk about the skills that make these, that build up to success. So we'll come back to this thought. Attainable. So you're starting with your big picture. We talked about the funnel. And you've got this big picture of what, like, if I could wake up tomorrow and have it all my way, what would it look like? And then breaking that down into doable steps. So maybe the movies, we're going to go back to the movies analogy. I want to go out to the movies with my friends and I want to not be worried that I'm going to get triggered. Or if something comes up that feels triggering to me, I have the coping skills to not let that take me out of the moment, and I know how to work through that. I have the coping skills to work through that moment. So breaking that down even farther might be, one goal is just understanding what my triggers are, or understanding what triggers are, period. Okay, now I did a class and I understood what triggers are. I read some books. I've got a good handle on it. I talked to my therapist. Okay, now coping skills around trigger. That's step 2 of that goal. So now I'm going to build some coping skills. I'm going to practice them with friends. Okay? So breaking your steps down into attainable is doable. Like, is this a doable thing, right? Oh, this is also where you consider other resources. Or other concerns. So one of the concerns might be access to resources. Do I have the resources I need to meet this goal? If not, is it something I can access? Is it something that someone can help connect me with? That kind of thing. Another thing might be mental health or physical health issues. So if you know, in the example of going to the movies and feeling very triggered at a movie, if you also are someone who's living with anxiety, that's going to add another layer to that goal. And so maybe part of your goal, maybe part of working through that goal is, you know, coping skills and therapy. And maybe part of that goal is getting on like a good med that will help you regulate that anxiety. And so you're going to balance both of those things, right? And so it's understanding that, like, you have additional things, that your sexual trauma is not this like thing that you compartmentalize away that doesn't impact your whole life, but it's all holistic. It all touches each other. And so understanding other things that are going on. And this feeds into that next bullet point of like related impacts of trauma. So knowing that trauma, we are talking about reclaiming our sexuality, but knowing that it's all connected, understanding the other impacts of trauma on our life and making progress in those spaces too. Again, whatever progress looks like for us, creating healing and creating wellness and health for us in those spaces, whatever that means to us, that's going to help improve our outcomes with our sexual goals. Okay, so realistic. Is this realistic? Is this even something you can do? If it's not something you can do, what would it take? So again, maybe the question is, okay, this isn't something I can do right now, but you know, I can work towards it, or I can have somebody access a resource. That part of the question is really like being really honest about what parts of the situation you have control over, what parts you don't. So in the example of before, oh, if I have anxiety and I'm working through trauma, I can't wave a magic wand and suddenly not be a person with anxiety. So that might be where I decide to access taking meds, you know, talk to my doctor, take meds in addition to the coping skills, so that I'm working with all of what I have. Well, if I don't have access to, maybe I don't have a doctor, but there are resources that folks can help plug me into to help get access to that. So it's really looking and saying, okay, like breaking this down into steps. And so we're going all the way back to that, like first, you know, we talked about building our roadmap. And if you guys want it, for the folks in the support group, I created a worksheet for building your support system and what that looks like. This is a good time to start tapping into like your existing support system structures and helping what's in my control and what's realistic for me, remembering that I don't have to do it alone. Like I have this network of humans that want to be there to help me, and maybe I need to build relationships to help get my goals where they need to be. And then again, exercising self-care and self-compassion. So you actually won't have control over everything. And not every goal you set is going to be doable right now. So some of them might be doable later. Some of them might be out of your control for a really long time. That's just like the nature of like the world we live in, is that it's just not all accessible to us right now. And so like, that's not a failure of you. That's just like how life is. And so exercising some self-care and self-compassion, and, or, you know, if you're moving through your goals and you're like, man, that really did seem like a realistic goal, but turns out it's really taken a lot out of me to get through this. This is a lot more overwhelming than I expected. Be gentle with yourself, because that's part of the process, and that's normal. Well, I don't know if I want to say normal. It's all normal. That's common. I don't like the word normal. I'm such a weirdo. Okay, and so I like time conscious for RT. So again, time conscious means being considerate of what is an appropriate expectation for how long these goals might take. So remembering that healing is spiralic, not linear. Healing is unique, so what's working really well for one person isn't going to be the perfect fit for someone else. And that every single step you take is a valid part of your process. Even steps that feel like backward steps are steps. And it's all feeding into your healing, and it's all feeding into you moving forward from that trauma. And so really celebrating the steps you take in your healing. So yeah, so those are our SMART goals for trauma recovery. So this is kind of the notes of all of it. So if you want to just pull that slide later, again, just let me know and I'm happy to send slides out. Okay, so skills building. This is what I talked about before. So part of like hitting these goals and part of like building what you determine success to be is going to be building skills in addition to the other resources you have available to you with your goal setting. And so maybe one of your goals is safety. A good skill you're going to build is safe coping skills. So the example that I talked about with, you know, you've got a woman who's been in a car accident and has trauma around the car accident, and then fast forward, she's in the parking lot of the grocery store, putting groceries in her car, and here's a horn honk and feels triggered, and in a moment is having flashbacks from her accident because her accident was very traumatic and that sound brought her back. A safe coping skill might be her ability to take a moment and ground herself and re-presence herself and breathe through that trauma and breathe through that flashback and find safety in that parking lot. Like, oh, I'm here in the parking lot, I am safe. Maybe a safe coping skill in that situation is calling a friend and asking a friend to talk her through a car ride home. Maybe that safe coping skill is she has an anti-anxiety med that she takes, or maybe she carries a journal with her and takes a minute to jot down her the thoughts that are coming up. Sorry, my cat is being silly under the table. Thoughts that are coming up, whatever. So there's a lot of safe coping skills. Also, maybe it's more about practical physical safety. So maybe this is the safety planning after a trauma. So some folks work with an advocate to do safety planning. Like if you haven't done that and you want to, call us. Like we're here, we're gonna help you do safety planning. And safety planning might look like changing the way you use social media. Safety planning might look like changing locks at your house. It might look like accessing different physical or emotional safety measures, right? So those are coping skills to help you meet those goals. And so your safety goal is one thing, and then what are the skills we use to meet that? So another example on this list was empowerment and voice. So that's a few down. And this is a favorite of mine. One of the things about sexual trauma that make it so pervasive and hard to shake is that it's very much about someone has taken your power from you, and someone has taken your ability to give choice and your sense of agency and autonomy. That has been taken from you, and in some cases very violently. And so a feeling like you can say no, and maybe you said, maybe you know, the person said no and it didn't matter, or maybe we talked about impacts of trauma in ways that our bodies respond to stress. Not everybody is able to fight back or say no, or make their no super clear, because the trauma is big and scary and your body goes into freeze mode or appease mode. And that was, you know, in last week's session. So if you are like, what is that? Go back and watch that video. You're in freeze or appease mode and you're not sure kind of how to move forward from that. So it can feel like you lose your voice. However, you're moving through trauma, like a big impact of trauma is losing that ability to speak up and that confidence in speaking up and advocating for yourself. And one of the best skills for that is practicing no. So before you even start rebuilding into yeses, and this is going to really play big in sexual healing and in reclaiming your sexuality, and in our lectures, you know, down the line, where we're talking about sexual pleasure, we're talking about intimacy, and we're talking about those things, before we even get to yes, practicing saying no. And it might just be as simple as somebody asks you for a favor you don't want to do. Practice saying no. You know, you've got your boss wants you to work extra hours and you can't do it. Practice saying no. And saying no and having your no respected is a very powerful way to reinstill those sense of boundaries. And maybe that's a conversation you want to have with people you love. Like, hey, listen, I'm going to practice saying no sometimes, and I need you to respect that. And maybe even I need some verbal, like, affirmation when I do, like, oh, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your honesty. And if you have a partner or friends or family members who are supporting this change or this growth in you, having a conversation like that where you're asking them for affirmation around the no, and not just, you know, not just respect, but like, it would be really helpful if you know, honored what I was saying. That can be really empowering. And then another one on the list, reframing your values. So sexual trauma can really, a lot of us have been raised with some, with social messages around sex and sexuality that are already problematic and already murky, and that in itself is a kind of sexual trauma. And so that is already something a lot of us are working through, and then adding in sexual trauma, sexual abuse on top of that, it can really leave you with sort of a weird sense of values, whether that's values around sexual behavior, whether that's values around gender and sexuality and your expression of those things, whether that's values around what relationships look like. It could impact bigger cultural issues. A lot of these things are connected. And so maybe you've got goals that are in that bucket of like reframing values around these things. And so ways to practice that would be to practice internalizing messages that are really supportive. So we talked about this at the very beginning, taking on board, like considering what's being said, taking on board what works, and disregarding harmful things where things just don't work for you. And disregarding a harmful message or disregarding a message that's not meant for you is a really good way to practice your no. So someone coming at you and saying, you know, I hear this one a lot, like, oh, I can't believe you started dating so soon after your trauma. Are you sure you're healed enough? Like, that's not helpful to you. That's not where you're at. So it's okay to like disregard that and like say, that's not for me. Whether you physically say that to the person or you just know internally, that message isn't for me. That's a really good, empowering way to start practicing your no, is saying like, what are my boundaries around what gets in and what stays out. Okay, so we're back to that motivations and affirmations for sexual healing. And so this is an activity that you'll go home and you'll do at home after this is done. But think of avoidance messaging as like a protective focus. So, you know, at the beginning we talked about you've got your two lists, your list of things that feel harmful and your list of things that feel pleasurable and good. So your avoidance messages, your protective messages might be the focus around things that are protecting you from the things that feel harmful. So maybe you're motivated to not feel a lot of panic or anxiety when the thought of being sexual comes up. So maybe that's a motivation. An approach motivation, that's like a connection focus. So that's gaining something. So the same goal might be phrased as, instead of, I really want to not have panic around the idea of sex, maybe instead the goal is, I'd really like to find masturbation pleasurable again. Or I'd really like to find making out with someone pleasurable again. Or I'd really like to find it pleasurable when someone holds my hand, or whatever it is. And so again, that's a goal. Like, I'd really like to find pleasure in that. And so one way is framed in an avoidance message, and one way is framed, or a protective message, and one way is framed in a like approach or connection message. Some folks are just really motivated to respond to one or the other. You might know right away which type of messaging feels like resonates with you the most. If you're not sure, I will say that from a scientific perspective, what we know from studies is that more people are motivated more strongly by a connection or approach focused message. So the positively worded language for the same goal. So when you're looking at your goal, you're looking at your motivations, like, why am I doing this? What's in this for me? Looking at the way you're wording them, and thinking about, like, does that wording spark joy for you? Like, and if it does, great. But if it's worded negatively and that's not sparking joy, maybe there's some shame around that wording, and then you want to like just change the language to a positive motivation instead, and then see how that feels. Or maybe vice versa. Maybe you're like, no, that protective focus feels very like I'm honoring where I'm at right now, and that feels really good for me. So you know where you're at, but there's kind of both. So the activity was to brainstorm 3 positive motivations, but really the activity is maybe try 3 of both. Maybe try 3 protective messages and then rewrite them as connection focused messages, or vice versa, and then see how they feel. What I will say is develop motivations that are about you. So we love our partners, we love our friends, we love our family members, we love the people around us very much. And it is very common and very much a natural part of things to feel motivated by wanting to keep those relationships intact and to not feel like a burden. We can feel being a trauma survivor can sometimes feel burdensome and I don't think that our loved ones feel like we're a burden, you know, but I think if we're recovering from trauma, we're moving through trauma, it can feel like, oh my gosh, is everybody tired of this? And I just want to be healed so that people aren't tired of me. That's a really common feeling, but I want you to do this activity. If you're going to do this activity, do some that are just about you. Because as you move through your healing, those are going to be the ones that are going to be a stronger and more solid foundation for the rest of your goal setting, for the rest of your behaviors, for the rest of how you conceptualize your healing. So motivations that are only about what's in it for you, what are you trying to get from this? And then write them down when you finally come up with some motivations that spark joy. So this is beyond our goals. These are maybe the bigger picture goals. So these aren't necessarily the steps that we're going to take to get there, but just the big picture goals. Like, you know, I'd really like to, I think one of the ones I just said was, I'd really like to find pleasure in masturbation. And maybe that's like like finding pleasure is like a strong motivation. Write that down and put it somewhere where you'll see it. And this is very intimate stuff, so you might not want to put it on your like monitor at work if people are walking by your office, depending on how you've worded it. But put it somewhere where you'll see it. Maybe it pops up as a reminder on your phone, or maybe you put it inside your journal and you see it. But write these down so you can see them and they can be empowering to you. Okay, so that is it for this. Does anyone have any questions? It looks like maybe no, that's fine. We don't usually have a ton of questions during these. I do have folks who reach out to me afterwards, so my information is here. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. this is the list of resources. I've been building on this as I go. So I do pull from like small things here and there. Maybe I'll take a webinar that has a really good thing and I'll put that in there. I'll find a quick article that I'm like, oh, I love this. And you'll get a citation. But these are the bigger pieces of literature that have been informing a lot of my conceptualization of these topics. So if you're wanting to like do a deeper dive than what you're going to get here, this is some of the stuff I've been using and it's been helpful to these talks. On the 30th, we're doing intimacy and self-forgiveness. And then December, we just have one talk in December, and then we're back in January with our every other week schedule. So December is going to be a short month because of all the holiday stuff packed in. So we'll do one more in November and then one right in the middle of December. So I'll remind you guys about that next time. So I think I'm going to stop sharing. It looks like that's it. I really, really appreciate all of you for being here. This will be recorded. I will send this out. If I don't have your name written down on if you like don't know for a fact that I have you in my email list of people to get recordings and you want the recordings, please shoot me an email. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. You can copy and paste it. So please shoot me an email and then let me know and I will send you a copy of the recording if you would like it. And thank you all so much for joining us. This was a shorter night, so I'm gonna end it here and I will see you guys all in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Amanda.